After 20 years since its original release, the Adidas F50 is back. And while it does bear some resemblance to the classic model, this boot has a new design all of its own. So in this video, we'll cover all the features of the F50 Elite and go over what they're like to play in. And then you can decide whether or not they might be a good option for you. And of course, at the end of the video, if you're interested in picking up a pair of the new F50s or any of the other boots we discuss, you can find links to them on sale with discount codes in the description below. So let's start like we normally do, going over the design. You can tell as soon as you get them out of the box that the new F50 Elite has a design and an aesthetic that's pretty similar to the F50 Adizero we saw over a decade ago. But holding them in hand, they actually feel pretty close to the X Crazy Fast Plus that was released just last year. And if you remember, when the Crazy Fast Plus was released, a lot of people made comparisons between that boot and the classic F50. So it almost feels like Adidas releasing the Crazy Fast Plus last year was getting everyone ready for the release of this new model. Now, when the original F50 was released all those years ago, its main claim to fame was being the thinnest and lightest boot on the market. So it's obviously no surprise that the new F50 Elite is impressively lightweight. In a size 10.5 US, the new F50 comes in at 197 grams, which is actually 3 grams lighter than the Vapor 15 from Nike. Now, the upper that's featured on this new F50 is what Adidas refers to as Fiber Touch. And while that Fiber Touch upper is obviously very thin, it doesn't really feel too flimsy. It has a density to it that makes it feel not too fragile. And that's definitely a good thing, because sometimes when you get to these really razor thin uppers, like we've seen on the past with some models like the Puma Ultra, they can be so thin to the point where if you get stepped on, you feel like the upper is going to rip entirely off your foot, which unfortunately we have seen happen to some players. Now, throughout their Fiber Touch upper, Adidas have also added what they're calling a sprint web coating. Basically, all that sprint web coating is a collection of elements throughout the boot that just give you a little bit more grip. They're pretty subtle, and I don't think they're going to make a huge difference, but to me, they do make the upper feel a little bit more premium. So this boot isn't going to have an upper that's really sticky like the Phantom GX from Nike or like the Predator Elite from Adidas. It's generally going to feel a lot more slick on the outside. Now, running throughout the center of the boot, we're going to have one of the simplest but also one of my favorite features in this boot, and that's going to be a traditional open U-throat lacing system. Now, in the past few years, when it comes to speed boots and honestly football boots in general, there's just been this obsession with one-piece knit uppers. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of boots that actually have great one-piece uppers, and sometimes the idea is executed on really well. But unfortunately, with the popularity of those new knit models, a lot of these traditional lacing systems have kind of disappeared. And that's a shame, because traditional lacing systems like the one you see in this F50 are going to allow for so much more adjustability, and generally I find that they're better for suiting a wide variety of foot shapes. So if you're moving from a boot like the X Crazy Fast 0.1 from last year to the new F50, that's probably going to be the biggest change. However, if you're coming from the X Crazy Fast Plus, you should already be used to that traditional lacing system. Now, under that lacing system, you're going to have a new feature that I haven't seen anyone implement before, and that's going to be what Adidas is calling their compression fit tunnel tongue. Now, essentially, this new tongue looks exactly how you would expect it to, being attached at both sides to the sole plate of the boot. So instead of the tongue just resting on top of your foot, it's actually going to wrap all around your foot. Now, as I mentioned when going over the F50 League, this doesn't really have a huge impact on the fit of the boots, but what it does do is it just makes sure that the tongue stays secured and centered over the top of your feet, which is a pretty nice feature, because oftentimes when you're playing in boots like this, the tongue can kind of slide around from left to right, and this feature pretty much removes that problem entirely. And then towards the heel area, you're going to have still a pretty minimal design, but just enough padding to reduce the possibility of blisters. And then flipping to the underside of the boots, you're going to see that here I have the AG sole plate from Adidas. And I'm happy to say that unlike previous years, this AG variation was actually pretty easy to get. So it seems like Adidas might be starting to follow in Nike's footsteps in making their artificial grass models more attainable. And generally, I'm a big fan of this AG configuration. You're going to have almost all conical studs throughout the heel and the forefoot, and then towards the front of the foot here, you are just going to have this circular pattern of studs. Now, this may seem like a similar idea to what Nike tried to implement with the Phantom in their Cyclone stud pattern, but I actually think Adidas does a much better job with this configuration, because when Nike used their Cyclone 360 stud pattern, they essentially just put bladed studs in a circular pattern, and I thought that it was way too aggressive for use on artificial grass. But if you look at the studs that Adidas is using here, although they're in this circular pattern, they're actually rounded off at the edges, so they're still not going to be too aggressive. So if you do play on AG, this sole plate is going to be a great option, but if you mostly play on firm ground natural grass, of course you can just get the standard variation with the sole plate that's going to have more bladed studs. And then in terms of the tooling on that sole plate, I'd say it's going to be a little bit on the stiffer side of a medium flex. Next up, how were they like on feet? I could tell immediately once I got these on feet that they do the F50 name justice. And I could also tell that I slightly prefer the fit of these compared to the X Crazy Fast 0.1 that I tried on last year. Because while those boots were pretty comfortable overall, I just really like the adjustability that I got with the lacing system on these. And to me, the upper just feels a little bit more premium compared to the upper on the Crazy Fast 0.1, which may have been a bit plasticky. And I think that subtle features like that compression fit tongue that we discussed earlier were just such a good addition, and I really like how it does kind of wrap around your foot. Now, in terms of sizing, I got these in my standard 10.5 US, and I found that the length was perfect. So I had just enough space between the end of my toes and the top of the boot. In terms of width, I thought that these were relatively average in width, which is pretty similar to most other Adidas boots. Towards the top of the lacing area, they do get the widest, and then they do taper pretty aggressively towards the top of the toe box. I would say I found the F50 to be slightly wider than the Vapor 15 and the Puma Ultra, but not quite as wide as speed boots from New Balance or Mizuno. But for all of those who are familiar with the shape of previous Adidas speed boots, whether it be the X Crazy Fast or the X Speed Flow, you're gonna get a pretty similar shape and feel with the new F50. The only added benefit in terms of fit, as I mentioned, is that you are gonna get a little bit more flexibility with that lacing system based on how you tie it. Next up, let's talk playability. Just as Adidas intended with these boots, they do feel very minimalist on feet and when you're kicking the ball. So what I mean by that is that they're gonna deliver an extremely close touch and a barefoot feel. So if you want something that has a lot of padding and maybe something that could give you a little bit more protection, these aren't gonna be the best option for you. But if you want something that's gonna feel really close, almost as if you're wearing nothing at all, the F50 is gonna definitely give you that sensation. Unfortunately for me, it was almost a little bit tough practicing in these because I did get a toe injury a few days before these boots came in, and every touch hurt a little bit just because how thin this upper was, but nevertheless, I still actually had a lot of fun with these. The cushioning you get from the heel area was so soft, I didn't notice any irritation whatsoever, and you can get a tremendous amount of lockdown out of the lacing system. I did find myself adjusting the laces just a little bit after playing for the first 10 minutes, just so I can get them a little bit tighter around the ankle area. I also appreciated that the upper isn't too sticky, so it's really easy to get a touch right out of your feet. Then I also wanted to do a pretty thorough test of the sole plate here because this is one of my first times playing in a designated AG sole plate from Adidas. So I found that for me, the best way to really test the sole plate was just doing simple dribbling drills where I would turn 180 as sharp as I could on the sole plates. And what I found was that you definitely do get a little bit more free rotation when turning in these boots compared to sole plates that have more aggressive bladed studs like you would find on the FG version. And that's ultimately the main goal of an AG sole plate. It's to reduce the rotational traction and make it less likely that your feet are going to get stuck when you're making pivots. And now I actually think it's fair to say that Adidas has an AG sole plate that can compete with Nike. The only negative thing I would note playing these boots is that after about an hour, I did get a little bit of fatigue in my feet due to the stiffness of the sole plate. However, a lot of people correctly pointed out when I reviewed the Vapor 15 from Nike that the sole plate does tend to break in a little bit over time in terms of its overall flex. So as the sole plate does eventually develop a little bit more of a bend, you're not going to have that issue as much. So overall, not only did these boots feel really nostalgic, but they were also a lot of fun to play in. And next up, let's talk about the price. Well, the new F50 Elite is going to retail for $260, which is definitely premium price tag territory. That's going to put it basically in the same price range of other top-end boots like the Predator Elite, the Phantom GX2, and the Vapor 15. But I do feel that compared to some of those other top-end products, the F50 does offer a unique feel. And that's actually the same thing I said about the X Crazy Fast Plus when it came out last year and was selling for $300. Because there just aren't that many options for thin, lightweight speed boots that have have this open traditional lacing system. And for that reason, I think that the F50 is actually going to have a lot of success even at this premium price point. But don't get me wrong, there are going to be some competitors to the F50, with some of them even coming within Adidas's own line. So next up, let's talk about the other options you might want to consider. So starting off, you're gonna have the takedown models from the F50 series, starting with the second tier F50 Pro. Now the F50 Pro is gonna retail for $150, making it over $100 less than the top end Elite here. And from what I can tell on the website, it has nearly an identical feature set down to the same Fiber Touch upper and Sprint Web coating. So I think for a lot of even really serious players, that Pro version is gonna be really popular and a great value option. But what might be an even better value proposition is the third tier takedown F50 League. Now the F50 League is going to retail for just $90, and I have to admit, I may have had just as much, if not even more fun playing in this third tier model. The upper is still crazy soft and the boots are definitely just as comfortable. The only main trade-off to consider when looking at the F50 League compared to the Elite model is that you are going to have a little bit more weight with the third tier takedown, but on the other hand, you're also going to have a bit more padding if that's what you want. But I still need to shout out the F50 League just because I do think that right now it's probably one of the best boots you can get under $100. And then obviously, I think that the Vapor 15 from Nike is going to be one of the main competitors to the new F50 Elite, and I think that a lot of people who find the Vapor to be just a little bit too narrow for them might actually find that the F50 is a slightly more comfortable boot. They're definitely both high quality, it really is just going to depend on your foot shape. Now another speed boot you could get that has an open traditional lacing system is the Mizuno Alpha Elite that's going to run around $160 to $170. Now the Mizuno Alpha is a great football boot, however, I personally think that the F50 just feels a little bit more premium and it fits my feet a little bit better than the Alphas. And finally, the last other option that I would mention is the X Crazy Fast Plus from last year. Because now that the new F50 is out, I can guarantee that you're going to start to see some pretty heavy discounts for the Crazy Fast Plus. And the Crazy Fast Plus is going to have a really similar design and feel just as lightweight as the F50. So if you happen to find a pair of the Crazy Fast Plus maybe retailing for under $200, I would definitely see it being a great deal compared to the F50 Elite, which is going to be $260. So what are my final thoughts? Well, the new F50 Elite, in my opinion, is a throwback done correctly. These boots really bring back the nostalgia of the old F50 while delivering it in a really clean and modern package. I think anyone old enough to wear those OG F50s is gonna love these, and anyone new to the series is also gonna like these boots as well. And overall, I think the F50 earns its place as Adidas's flagship model. Just don't forget that if you're on a budget, the takedowns are great too. And that is gonna do it for this video. Let me know in the comments below if you've gotten the chance to try on the new F50 and what you think of them. Thank you so much for watching, like and subscribe if you've enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.